Welcome back to the Apostles' Mailbox, where today we're going to learn that Jesus actually died on a Thursday. Stay tuned. Yes, you heard me right. We are going to talk about how Jesus died on a Thursday and how the Bible actually teaches us that. We're going to find this by looking in the Old Testament prescriptions for the Passover and also for the New Testament descriptions of what happened that last week leading up to the resurrection. And if you're confused as to why that's like maybe interesting or controversial, a little bit of probably already know this, but for the sake of those who might not, normally in Christian tradition, on a Thursday, we celebrate what's called Maundy Thursday, which comes from the Latin for mandatum, which means a command. And it's taken from John 13, where at the Last Supper, Jesus says to his disciples, "A new command I give you, you must love one another. By this, all men will know that you are my disciples, that you love one another." Okay, so that's where we get the Maundy in what is traditionally celebrated as Maundy Thursday, the Last Supper. Okay, and then on Friday, of course, we have Good Friday, where we celebrate that Jesus died for our sins, that he took the punishment for our guilt upon him. And then on Sunday, we celebrate Easter Sunday, which some people don't like to use that word because the word Easter comes from Greek mythology, actually, I believe. And so often we'll call it Resurrection Sunday, but at any point on Sunday we celebrate the tomb was empty. But that doesn't work, right? If Jesus died on Thursday, then we should call it Maundy Wednesday and Good Thursday. And we'll get into a little bit of why I think this is important in a little bit. But by way of introduction, okay, that's where we stand. I'm going to try to prove that what all Christians pretty much everywhere celebrate, at least in the West, I'm not sure about the Eastern traditions, I think we're celebrating it wrong. Okay, so in Exodus 12, let's just look straight into the text. Okay, so in Exodus 12, God is giving instructions for the Passover. And we read that Yehovah says to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, "This month shall be for you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year for you." And of course, the reason that Jesus is doing, or God is doing this, is because Israel is coming out of Egypt at this point. They're about to be delivered. They're going to become a new nation. And when you start a new nation, God says that's going to be the first month of the year. Okay, so in chapter 13, he's going to call it the month of Abib. But later on, when the Jews were in captivity in Babylon, they started calling it the month of Nisan. And so I may refer to it as Abib or Nisan, but they're the same month. Okay, just so you know that. It's the first month because that was the month that God created them as a nation. So let's go back to where we were. Okay, it's the first month of the year for you. He says, "Tell all the congregation of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, every man shall take a lamb according to their father's houses, a lamb for a household. And if the household is too small for a lamb, then he and his nearest neighbor shall take according to the number of persons. According to what each can eat, you shall make your count for the lamb. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male a year old. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats, and you shall keep it until the 14th day of this month, when the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill their lambs at twilight." Okay, so we've got 2 days given us. On the 10th of Nisan, or the 10th of Abib, each household selects a lamb, the sacrificial lamb, and they keep it. They set it apart for 4 days until on the 14th of Nisan, they slaughter it at twilight. Okay, and you say, well, what's the big deal about all of this? Well, twilight is the time in the afternoon before the evening starts. Okay, so some Jews estimated this to be around 3 p.m. until the evening. And the reason that it's before evening starts is because at evening time, that was when the next day started. You see, the Jews didn't count days like us, where we start at midnight and go to midnight. So technically our day runs nighttime, daytime, nighttime. They started their day at nightfall, and then would run through the whole night and then through the whole day. And when the next night arrived, okay, the next day would begin. We'll make a little chart for this so you can see it in a minute. But so that's what's going on. So on the 10th, they select the lamb. And on the 14th, at the very end of the day of the 14th, at twilight, they slaughter the lamb. Okay? And then what they're going to do is they're going to put, well, let's just read it. Sorry, I don't want to get ahead of myself. So, then they shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and the lintel of the houses in which they eat it. They shall eat the flesh that night, roasted on the fire with unleavened bread and bitter herbs they shall eat it. Do not eat any of it raw or boiled in water, but roasted, its head with its legs and its inner parts, and you shall let none of it remain until morning. Anything that remains until the morning you shall burn. In this manner you shall eat it, with your belt fastened, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it in haste. It is Jehovah's Passover. For I will pass through the land of Egypt that night, and I will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and on all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am Jehovah. The blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and when I see the blood I will pass over you, and no plague will befall you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. This shall be for you a memorial day, and you shall keep it as a feast to the Lord throughout your generations. As a statute forever you shall keep it as a feast. All right, so they slaughter the lamb at twilight before nightfall on the 14th. They put the blood on their doorposts, and then he says, and then that night you eat it. So when night shows up, already that is now the 15th of Nisan, okay? So the 15th of Nisan, when they eat the lamb, is called the Passover, okay? And the specific meal that they celebrate is called a Seder. And so I've just made a little chart for you here. The day starts, the 10th of Nisan starts with a night, right? And then that black part is where I'm going to put our English day names. And the reason is that it will keep it straight because our day technically starts in the middle of the night. So I'll put the name where our day would start. Okay, so it's night, and then it's daytime, and then it's twilight. So on the 10th of Nisan, the Jews would take their lamb, and then on the 14th of Nisan, at twilight, they would slaughter the lamb, and then at night, they would eat the lamb, and that would be the 15th of Nisan. Okay, you with me so far? So God gives them this, and then he establishes another festival. All right, so let's read about that in the following verses. Okay, so he tells them, this shall be for you a memorial day. You shall keep it as a feast to Jehovah. Throughout your generations, as a statute forever, you shall keep it as a feast. 7 days then you shall eat unleavened bread. On the first day you shall remove leaven out of your houses. For if anyone eats what is leavened from the first day until the 7th day, that person shall be cut off from Israel. On the first day you shall hold a holy assembly, and on the 7th day a holy assembly. No work shall be done on those days. All right? But what everyone needs to eat, that alone may be prepared by you. And you shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, for on this very day I brought your hosts out of the land of Egypt. Therefore you shall observe this day throughout your generations as a statute forever. In the first month, from the 14th day of the month at evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at evening. For 7 days no leaven is to be found in your houses. If anyone eats what is leavened, that person will be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether he is a sojourner or a native of the land. You shall eat nothing leavened. In all your dwelling places you shall eat unleavened bread. Okay, so here's what we've got going on here. You have, on the 14th, you slaughter the lamb and you stop eating yeast when evening comes, okay? And then for 7 days, you're going to eat no yeast on the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So on the 15th of Nisan, you have the Passover meal that you eat at night, and that day is a day where you do no work. Remember, he said on the first day and on the 7th day you do no work. That makes these days a Sabbath. So the Jews had a Sabbath once every week. It was on Saturday. So it started from like our Friday at night, when night fell, through that night, through Saturday day until night fell on what we would call Saturday night. So that was their Sabbath, and that happened every week. Now the festival of unleavened bread would happen based on the day of the month. Now, because the Jewish calendar was lunar and it didn't exactly fit week to week, so this just like our calendars, right? The same day of the month is not always the same day of the week. That meant that the unleavened bread moved around on days of weeks. Okay, so in one year, the first day of unleavened bread might be on a Tuesday. And if it fell on a Tuesday, then that Tuesday would be a Sabbath day. Why? It was a Sabbath because of the festival. And then when Saturday of that week showed up, you would get another Sabbath because it was still the weekly Sabbath. So in that week, you would have 2 Sabbaths. All right, so this will come in important later. But when we look at our chart, we'll just notice that I've put in on the 15th of Nisan, or the 15th of Abib, that it's a Sabbath, and on the 21st, that it's a Sabbath. When the 21st day ends, then you're done not eating yeast. Okay? So, now we're going to look to the New Testament, okay? Because there's some things in the New Testament that were going to help us navigate that last week when Jesus died, okay? Now, most of us as Christians understand that Jesus is the fulfillment of the Passover. Like, he's the reason that God gave us this Passover, the Jews. It was to prepare them for the lamb that would someday be slaughtered to save them from their sins, to bring them out of the bondage of sin. Okay? So, when the lambs were slaughtered in Egypt as a means of God delivering Israel out of Egypt, so they would know that when Jesus came and arrived and he was slaughtered as a sacrificial lamb for our sins, that we were brought out of bondage to slavery and we were made a new people, right? So the people of God now includes, as we know, Gentiles. So during Holy Week, there's a few things that we see recorded in your scriptures. The first thing is that we are told in John, in particular, in John chapter 12, we are told that 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, whom Jesus has raised from the dead. So they gave a dinner for him there. Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those reclining with him at a table. Okay, so this happens 6 days before the Passover. The Passover is 15 Nisan. So 6 days prior is 9th of Nisan. All right. So then we find the next day, we're told in John, the large crowd that had come to the feast heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem. So they took branches of palm trees and they went out to meet him, crying out, "Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, even the King of Israel." Okay, so this is the next day after 6 days before Passover. So that makes it 5 days before Passover. So when Jesus comes in, and on Palm Sunday, and the crowd who has traveled to Jerusalem in order to celebrate the Passover later this week, when they hear he's coming, they go out and they say, "Hosanna," which means "please save us." It's a cry to God to save them. All right, so this is happening on the 10th of Nisan. And this is fascinating for us, right? Because what happened on the 10th of Nisan? The Jews selected their sacrificial lamb. And on the 10th of Nisan, Jesus rides into Jerusalem on a donkey and he goes into the temple, right, where the sacrifice would have been made at the temple. And so, in essence, God is selecting Jesus. He's setting him apart on 10th of Nisan as the Passover prefigured. Okay, so it's on the 10th of Nisan, and John makes it very clear. It's 5 days before the Passover, right, that this happens, that Jesus is set apart as the Passover lamb. Okay, now we know that when the Passover came, the lamb is sacrificed on the 14th, and then they eat it after night when the next day is beginning, the 15th. Okay, so this is going to be Crucifixion Day. Now, when we read in John's Gospel, in John chapter 18, that the Jewish leaders are bringing Jesus to trial, they first of all, they have their own Jewish trial at night, the night they arrest him, and then very early in the morning, they take him to the Gentile governor's house. Okay, so here's how John describes it. He says, "Then they led Jesus from the house of Caiaphas, who was a high priest, to the governor's headquarters. It was early morning. They themselves did not enter the governor's headquarters so that they would not be defiled, but could eat the Passover." Okay, so remember, when they ate the Passover, they were required to eat it at night at the beginning of 15 Nisan, and nothing could remain until morning. All right, so they ate as much as they could and then they burned the rest. So by the morning of the 15th of Nisan, all of the Passover to be eaten is gone. It's already been eaten. All right, so when John tells us that the Jewish leaders didn't go into the governor's headquarters because he was a Gentile and it would have defiled them and they couldn't eat the Passover, he said specifically they didn't go in because they wanted to eat the Passover. Okay, it would defile them and they wanted to eat the Passover, so they couldn't go in. So that means Jesus has to be sacrificed not on the 15th of Nisan, because by daytime on the 15th, it's already done. So he has to be killed on the 14th of Nisan. All right, the same day that Jesus is put on trial and he is slaughtered. He is slaughtered in the day, the 14th of Nisan, and the Jewish leaders are keeping themselves pure so they can eat the Passover as soon as night falls. Okay, so that gives us a clear day, a Jewish day of the month, that Jesus is crucified on 14th of Nisan. Now, of course, this makes sense, right? Because what happens on the 10th is you select the lamb, and Jesus came into the temple on the 10th. And what happens on the 14th is that you slaughter the lamb in the afternoon, and then you eat the lamb at night. And so Jesus is slaughtered on the afternoon of the day that the Jews are celebrating the Passover by slaughtering the Passover lambs. Makes absolutely perfect sense. Okay? So now here's where the difficulty comes. Because when we're trying to figure out how this works, there is a discussion of the day of preparation. All right? Now, at least three of the Gospels, I don't know if Matthew mentions it, but at least three of the Gospels in their account of this week, they mention the day of preparation. And specifically, they say that Jesus had to be buried because it was the day of preparation. On a Sabbath day, you couldn't do any work. And so if Jesus was dead when the Sabbath started, you couldn't do any work of taking him down from the cross and burying him. And so Jesus would have been left hanging on the cross all through the Sabbath, which would defile the Sabbath. Okay? So we're just going to look at what the Gospels say about this really quick. So when Jesus had been crucified, Mark says, when evening had come, since it was the day of preparation, that is the day before the Sabbath. Okay? Luke tells us that at the time Jesus dies, it was the day of preparation and the Sabbath was beginning. And then John tells us in a couple places, in verse 14, he says it was the day of preparation of the Passover. I'll get to that in a second. It was about the 6th hour. And he said to the Jews, "Behold your king." And then later in verse 31, it says, since it was the day of preparation, so that the bodies would not remain on the cross on the Sabbath, for that Sabbath was a high day, the Jews asked Pilate that their legs might be broken and that they might be taken away. Okay? So, if the Sabbath is a Saturday, then the preparation for the Sabbath was Friday. You would get all your work done and prepare everything for Saturday because you couldn't do any work on Saturday. So Friday was called the day of preparation. And so a long time ago, some scholars knew this. The day of preparation came before the Sabbath. So therefore, they said, because all of the Gospels agree that Jesus died on the day of preparation, and they had to get him in the ground before the Sabbath went, and they couldn't do any work, that they, in fact, that proves that Jesus died on a Friday. But John gives us a little bit of a clue here, okay? John tells us that it was the day of preparation of the Passover. Okay, so you had a day of preparation for the Sabbath, but the day of preparation for the Passover was actually the day in which everybody was cleaning all the yeast out of their house because they had 7 days where they couldn't have any yeast in their house, right? And also, of course, the day in which they prepared the sacrificial lamb. They slaughtered the lamb on the 14th. It was the day of preparation of the Passover. So John clarifies, and it's possible that John clarifies this actually because tradition had maybe already started to get it wrong. It's generally thought that John's gospel was the last one written after the other ones, and John clarifies that the day of preparation was the day of preparation for the Passover. And as we talked about in Exodus, the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the 15th of Nisan, was a Passover every year, or was a Sabbath every year, whether it was a Tuesday or a Thursday or a Wednesday or a Sunday, whatever day that first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread fell on, it was always a Sabbath. And so the day of preparation of the Passover was the day before that. Okay, so if you don't understand this because you don't celebrate the Jewish festivals, then you might say day of preparation, oh, that was Friday, and they had to get this done before Saturday. But in reality, what all this means is that the day before the Feast of Unleavened Bread started, which was a Sabbath, they had to take the body of Jesus and get it in the ground so that it wouldn't be on the cross on the Sabbath, the big high holy day of this festival. Remember, they were to have a holy convocation. They were to have this big thing going on, and that would have been the 15th of Nisan. So the day of preparation, John tells us, is the day of preparation of the Passover. Okay? So let's put this all together then. When did Jesus die? Well, if we take our month, or our festival week of the month of Nisan, on the 10th of Abib here we have that you take a lamb. On the 14th day you slaughter the lamb. You stop eating yeast when night falls. On the 15th you eat your Passover, and it's a Sabbath on the 15th. Again, regardless of which day of the week it is for us, that was a Sabbath. And then the 21st would have been a Sabbath. So we're told that 6 days before the Passover, Jesus was in Bethany, and then the next day he entered into the temple on the triumphal entry. This is what we celebrate as Palm Sunday. Okay, so Jesus is selected as a Passover lamb on the 10th. This means then that the trial for Jesus would have been held on the 14th of Nisan at the governor's headquarters. Remember, in John 18, we saw that the Jewish leaders did not want to defile themselves because they still hadn't eaten the Passover yet. Okay, so they didn't enter in. What that means then is that Jesus had his Last Supper and he was arrested and he was put on trial by the Jews at the night that started the 14th of Abib. What that means for us then is that the preparation for the Last Supper actually started on the 13th, that the disciples prepared their Passover. We'll get to that a little bit later. Okay, which means that Jesus was crucified at the time that the Jews traditionally slaughtered their Passover lamb, right? At twilight or in the afternoon of the 14th of Nisan, preparation day. Okay, and then all our Gospels tell us, because it was a day of preparation of the Passover, Jesus was buried that very day. He died and was buried. Okay, and I just want to highlight, it's the day of preparation for the Sabbath because it is a festival Sabbath. That doesn't mean a weekly Sabbath. That means it is the Sabbath that happens because it is day one of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Okay, so if we take Palm Sunday, when Jesus enters the temple with the palm branches and everything, and we put that on Sunday, and we fill in the rest of our days of the week, what we end up with is Jesus dying on Thursday, and him having to be buried because it's the preparation day of the Passover. And then on Friday, you have a festival Sabbath. And then on Saturday, you have the weekly Sabbath. And then on Sunday, when the women can finally do work again, they bring their spices to anoint Jesus' body on Sunday. And then they find the tomb is empty. Okay? So, not only does this fit wonderfully with the triumphal entry on Sunday, as we celebrate it on Palm Sunday, but you'll also notice that this gives us the sign of Jonah. So at one point, Jesus said to his disciples, to his audience, that he would give them the sign of Jonah. He said, as Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights, so also I will be in the tomb 3 days and 3 nights, basically. Okay, so you have, if you do it this way, Jesus dies. He's in the tomb before nightfall on the 14th. So he's in the tomb on day 1 on Thursday. Day 2, he's in the tomb on Friday. Day 3 on Saturday, he's in the tomb. And on day 4, before the day starts, right? Before the day dawns, when they get there in the morning, the tomb is empty. And this also gives us 3 nights in the tomb, right? Because the first night would be the 15th, and then the second night would be the beginning of Saturday, right? Our Friday night, their Saturday, and then Sunday and the night before he's risen, that would be the 3rd night. Okay, so if you count it this way, Jesus is actually in the ground 3 days and 3 nights as he promised. Okay, so that's how it ends up, and you think, oh, this is wonderful, but we really, how could the church have been wrong for so long? I mean, Jesus died on a Friday. I don't believe that. Okay, now if we want to, we can fix the day of the crucifixion. We can say, okay, you know what? We'll just stick with tradition. We'll say Jesus died on Friday. And then he was in the tomb on Saturday and he resurrected on Sunday. And we say, oh, well, that's only 2 days and 2 nights for him to be in the tomb. But no worries, because the Jews counted any fraction of a day as a day and a night. That's just how they described it. And so if you had 10 minutes in the afternoon, that was described as 1 day and 1 night. And therefore, because he's in the tomb on the 14th or on Friday, that counts as a day and the night, even though it's only the day when he's buried. And the 15th counts as a day and a night because he's in the tomb for a day and a night. And the 16th counts for a day and the night, even though he's only in the tomb for the night and not actually during any daytime hours. And so it counts. Voila, we fixed it. Jesus is in the tomb 3 days and 3 nights. By Jewish reasoning, and that way Jesus can die on Friday, like we all really know what happened because we've been celebrating in that way forever. But here's a problem with that, right? We didn't calculate the triumphal entry, Jesus riding into Jerusalem, according to our calendar days or our weekdays of the month. We calculated them according to the Jewish number of the day, okay? So if Jesus dies on a Friday, which has to be the Passover crucifixion day, the 14th of Nisan, and then the day of preparation is then a Friday, and that's for the Sabbath. Then you have the Sabbath on Saturday, you have Jesus resurrecting on a Sunday. If you count backwards to the 10th of Nisan, then when Jesus, 5 days before the Passover, he enters into the temple on Palm Monday. See that? So either you mess up Palm Sunday or you mess up Good Friday. You can't have your cake and eat it too. And so if we do want to celebrate Palm Sunday on Sunday, and Jesus actually is going to die and be in the tomb 3 days and 3 nights, and so he's going to be sacrificed on Thursday, then we have to adjust our celebration of his crucifixion in order to keep the Sunday, Palm Sunday tradition alive. Okay? So we go, well, that stinks. Yes. Yes and no. Okay. So this is why I think that Jesus actually died on Thursday, right? Because this way we have Jesus entering into Jerusalem, into the temple on Palm Sunday, the 10th of Nisan. He is sacrificed. He is killed on the 14th, which is the day of preparation, as John tells us, for the Passover, not the day of preparation for the weekly Sabbath, but day of preparation for the Passover Sabbath. Jesus is crucified on that 14th. He's in the tomb on Thursday day, Friday night and day, Saturday night and day, Sunday night, and then before morning on Sunday, the tomb is empty and Jesus is out of the tomb. Okay? And so that keeps our chronology nice there, and it also gives us this beautiful thing where we recognize that Jesus has been selected by God as the Passover lamb and crucified, sacrificed on the day of the Passover, just as he had prefigured to the Jews so very, very long ago. Okay? So, this leaves us with just one question. You say, wait, I thought the disciples celebrated the Passover with Jesus for the Last Supper. Wasn't that the Passover Seder that they celebrated together? And the answer is, Jesus celebrated early. Okay, so what we know about these festivals is that the whole nation of Israel was supposed to attend. So this is hundreds of thousands of people descending upon Jerusalem to sacrifice their lambs. And if you had to sacrifice hundreds of thousands of lambs in the temple in one afternoon, you could never get it done in time. And so as it would turn out, the Jews would travel to Jerusalem, and they would start celebrating, if you will, that sacrifice early. So you noticed on Palm Sunday when he comes in, 5 days before Jerusalem, we're told that a bunch of the Jews who were there for the festival came out to greet him. Now the festival hadn't started yet. It wasn't going to start for another 5 days, but they were already there for the festival. And it was very common for the Jews to do their own sacrifice, this Passover, out ahead of time so that it wouldn't be this massive zoo on the day and it would never happen. Okay, so it is entirely consistent with Jewish practice of the time that Jesus and his disciples would have celebrated that Passover a day early, and especially, of course, for Jesus, knowing that he was the Passover lamb for the next afternoon. Of course, the Jewish leaders, the high priests and whatever, they would have made sure they had their ticket to be first in line to have their sacrifice prepared on the Temple Mount, at the temple, on the right day, at the right time, because that's who they were, and so they hadn't celebrated their Passover yet, but Jesus already had. Okay, so that's how Jesus celebrated the Passovers with his disciples. Now here's the big question, okay? Why do we care? Do we care because it's wrong to celebrate Jesus' crucifixion on Friday? No. And in fact, if I'm honest, I'll tell you, it's possible that Jesus died on a Friday, and the way we get 3 days and 3 nights is through the Jewish way of counting. It's possible, okay? The point is not to point out that we're all wrong and we need to fix it and celebrate it on the right day. That's not the point, because we all know that the tomb was empty on a Sunday, and that's really our big day of celebration anyway. But that even doesn't matter. Paul says to the Galatians in Galatians chapter 4, he's accusing them of throwing out grace for law. He says, but now that you've come to know God, or rather to be known by God, how can you turn back again to the weak and worthless elementary principles of the world, whose slaves you want to be once more? You observe days and months and seasons and years. I'm afraid I may have labored over you in vain. Okay, so Paul says to these believers, he says, if you think that you're going to be right with God because you're celebrating these right days and seasons and weeks and months, he said, you're wrong. And in fact, you're turning your back on the gospel, which says that you are saved by grace as God's gift to you through your faith. It's not through your works. It's not through what you do. And so if we celebrate, for instance, Good Friday on the wrong day, that Jesus died on Friday instead of Thursday, God is not going to condemn us for it. And in fact, according to Paul's principle, like, we don't even need to celebrate Easter at all. We do, of course, because we love to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus Christ, or many of us do. But you don't need to do that. And it doesn't make you any more righteous before God or less righteous before God if you didn't. If you just skipped Good Friday and Easter this year, God would be okay with that. He wouldn't condemn you. You're not saved because you celebrate Easter properly, or Resurrection Sunday, right? That's not what makes you right with God. Okay, so the point is not to fix our dates. That's not why I do this episode. I do this episode because, well, it's Easter week, and every year I'm reminded of this, like, oh, here we go, celebrating the death of Jesus on a day he didn't die, right? But also for this reason, all right? This is a very clear reminder that church tradition can be wrong. Okay, I hope you notice when we went through this exercise that either the church is celebrating Palm Sunday wrong or they're celebrating the death of Jesus wrong. One of those is wrong. All right. Now, I think that we're celebrating the death wrong, but it could be wrong. Maybe we're celebrating Palm Sunday when we should be celebrating Palm Monday. I don't know. Okay. At either rate, though, we have a tradition, an ancient tradition that none of us ever think to question, of which at least one of those days is wrong. And this should be a clear reminder to us that no matter how popular a belief or tradition is, no matter how long it's been going on, that is not a guarantee that it's true. Okay? You can't just say, well, everybody believes this and we've been doing it forever, so it must be true. And all of the church, experts and bosses and whatever, they all tell us this is what it is, so it is. Okay? The church can and has been wrong over many things throughout the years. Okay? And if you're a Protestant, you already somewhere believe this in your head because the Protestant Reformation sought to correct things that were wrong within the Roman Catholic Church. But the same is true about the Protestant traditions, is that they also can be wrong. Okay? And what I wanted to get to is this. You should allow the Bible to overturn any, and I put it in quotes, orthodox doctrine if the text demands it. Okay? There should be nothing that you believe about Christianity that if the Bible taught something different, there should be nothing that you would hold on to despite the evidence in the scripture to the contrary. Okay? That's my conviction, of course, because I think that the Bible is our highest teaching authority. But even so, like, if you believe that the Bible is truly God's word in any framework, right? If you think like God has truly communicated himself to us in the word, and then you have something that comes up, some big, guy in a fancy robe or hat or with a big title or a lot of degrees behind his name, if they teach you something and the Bible contradicts it and the Bible teaches something else, you should be ready and willing to throw that doctrine away. Okay? The Bible should be able to overturn any orthodox doctrine if the text so demands. All right, so right now I'm in the middle of doing a little series on changing your mind. I'm calling it Anatomy of a Conversion, right? And the idea is I had this belief for decades that I thought, because our church held to it very firmly and it was written in our statement of faith and I believed it all my life and everybody I looked up to and respected as a Bible teacher, I thought held this belief. And so I assumed it had to be true. And then in the course of looking at my Bible, I was like, wait a minute, the Bible seems to indicate something else. So I had to change my mind on that belief. It was very, very hard. But part of that process is as I started doing that, I started reading my Bible in a different way and saying like, okay, so this is true. And if this is true, and I've got doctrines that fly in the face of this, I'm going to believe the Bible first. And even if it means adjusting some of my doctrines, no matter how old or how widespread or who says those doctrines, what I believe is that the Bible is true. I think probably if you're listening to me, most of you would agree with that. And if that's the case, then you should be able to take any Orthodox doctrine, and if it contradicts the Bible, you should be able to let it go. Okay? So I'm doing this series. You can watch the series on that. There is another doctrinal belief that I have been wrestling with for it'll be over a year now, and I still have not come to like clear, firm, definitive conclusions. I'll be sharing about that in the weeks and months to come, but it's another one of those cases where I just keep reading the Bible and I just keep saying things that just don't seem to fit with this other doctrine that I've held to for a very long time. And so as I share that with you, I thought this was just a perfect example where you can look in the Bible and you can say, we have this tradition. We all assume it's true. It's sort of almost in that unquestionable category. But when you look at the text and you understand the text and you look at the implications of the text, what you find out is that one of our traditions actually has to be wrong. And that's not a terrible thing. It means that we adjust our belief about God to fit what the scriptures reveal to us, rather than adjusting our view of the scriptures to fit into the doctrines that we've been taught or true and unassailable. So before I soapbox too much or get off any other tangents, I'm just going to wrap it up. Hopefully you've been challenged. Hopefully next year, when it comes to Easter and Resurrection Sunday, you won't sit there and stew about how it's bad that we're celebrating on the wrong day, but instead you will celebrate in the fact that God selected Jesus as the perfect Passover lamb. He set him apart on the 10th. He sacrificed him on the 14th, and the blood of Jesus covered our sin and our guilt and brought us into the kingdom. And that on that Sunday, when the Sabbath was over, the tomb was empty, Jesus is alive. God bless you, brothers and sisters. I'll see you again here soon.